Let me be very clear. I did not collude with Russia, nor do I know of anyone else in the campaign who did so. I had no improper contacts. I have not relied on Russian funds for my businesses. And I have been fully transparent in providing all requested information.
This week, Jared Kushner was in the House and the Senate in separate closed-door sessions to discuss his contacts with Russians during the campaign, including the June 2016 meeting with a Russian lawyer who was offering the promise of damaging information on Hillary Clinton. In a lengthy written statement, Kushner admitted to his attendance not only at that meeting, but at 4 meetings with Russian officials during the campaign and transition, all of which he had failed to mention in his original security clearance application. Now, he claims to have not known the subject matter of the June meeting set up by Donald Trump Jr. because he only partially read his brother-in-law's email. One wonders how he missed the subject line of those emails, which was Russia, Clinton, private and confidential. Kushner's explanations aren't nearly enough for House Democrats, who this week continue to push to have his security clearance revoked. I'm joined now by Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell of California, ranking member of the CIA subcommittee of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. And Congressman, do you find it credible that Jared Kushner opened an email that said Russia, Clinton, private and confidential, but did not know the subject of the meeting before he showed up?
Good morning, Joy. I don't think there's any clickbait that's more tempting than private and confidential. So I think what we are seeking to understand is, does it make sense that the email he did not read was the one that had opponent's name in it, Clinton, a foreign adversary's name in it, Russia, said private and confidential, and then went on to offer damaging information from the Russian government against Hillary Clinton. But Joy, the other part of that statement that you alluded to with Jared Kushner, he said that the email he did read was an October 30th email, 10 days before the election. You can imagine how busy he must have been then, which was essentially a spam email saying that Russians had Donald Trump's tax returns and that Kushner better pay 52 Bitcoin, otherwise he was going to, have to see those exposed. So, did he not read the one that said Clinton, Russia, private and confidential, and the one that he did read was what most people would probably see as spam? I think we have to test that, and right now it doesn't really add up.
And last week, Ari Melber, my colleague here on his show, had on a woman named Elizabeth Spears, who used to work for Jared Kushner, and asked her about this idea if he was the kind of person who would show up to a meeting without knowing what it was about. Take a listen.
I find it implausible that he would show up to a meeting without knowing what it was about. He's a busy guy. In my experience, every meeting we had was planned and scheduled, and he always had an agenda for it.
When he showed up to meetings with you, with his business, he knew what they were about.
Yeah. I don't find it credible that he had no idea what these meetings were about.
And given, Congressman, that you also had the campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, invited to the meeting, as well as Jared Kushner and Donald Trump Jr., it doesn't seem that anyone is sort of buying that explanation. Can you just tell us, what have you been able to glean about what Jared Kushner's role in the campaign was at that point? What was he actually doing for the campaign?
Joy, I actually found Jared Kushner to be a very bright, worldly, thoroughbred type individual who was quite meticulous in his role on the campaign. And actually, if you read his statement, he also, if you believe him, was in charge of everything from scheduling to fundraising, the digital operation. So I actually take him at his word and believe those around him that he was quite involved in the campaign. He wasn't a novice. He wasn't way in over his head. He brought a different experience. He certainly didn't have political experience, but he brought a different experience to the campaign. So it's just hard to imagine that in June, right before the president goes out and says that there's going to be new damaging information about Hillary Clinton, that this meeting somehow was not seen or observed by Jared Kushner when he read the email.
And the digital operation piece, I think, I find very interesting personally, because that would be the operation that was sort of cooperating in spreading memes about Hillary Clinton, in getting, online, sort of adherence to Donald Trump to know information about Hillary Clinton. Do you find it interesting to sort of explore whether that digital operation was receiving and disseminating some of the information that was coming in through those Russian hacks?
It's too early to tell right now, but part of our investigation is to understand, what data was extracted extracted from the DNC, from John Podesta's emails, and how it was weaponized through social media, through fake news, through trolls that the Russians were using, through RT and Sputnik, their state broadcasting corporations, and whether there was a link between the Trump campaign and the Russians who were hacking it. We know that Roger Stone, for example, was receiving this information from Kushner 2.0. He was in contact with them, at least, about what would be coming, and Kushner 2.0, as our intelligence community says, was a Russian cutout. And so we want to understand, was this unwitting behavior by Roger Stone, or was it part of a coordinated effort to work with the Russians?
And let's go now to Jared Kushner's sort of belated disclosures about his assets. The Washington Post reported in July 21st that he made a revised filing in which he revealed lots of assets he'd forgotten about before. The new disclosure released by the White House detailed more than 70 his attorney said he'd inadvertently left out of earlier filings. You said that you thought him to be a meticulous fellow, somebody who's a bright fellow. Why does he seem to be he seems to have such a difficulty remembering meetings, filling out forms, and remembering what assets he has?
This seems to be the pattern around almost all things Russia or conflicts of interest that the Trump family has, which is to deny that they ever existed, and then only once confronted with them by overwhelming evidence from congressional investigators or the press, they acknowledge them and then try and downplay them, and then they put them forward in filings that are required by the government. But Joy, I also want to say that I see the president going to a very dangerous place when it comes to Russia. And I think the June 9th email took all this constellation of contacts and put him in better perspective for us as to what was going on. And the president now has gone from no Russia, no collusion, to essentially, well, that's politics. That's what happens in campaigns. And I think that's because the evidence is so overwhelming that they were willing to work with the Russians. And that's why they're trying to deflect, distract, and not disclose.
All right. And who else would you like to talk to in this committee? You guys have talked to Jared Kushner. Who else would you like to see come in front of you?
Don Jr., certainly Paul Manafort, General Flynn are individuals of high interest. And, we just want to understand, were all of these contacts that they had with Russians, whether it was the government or business individuals and oligarchs, were they just coincidences that they happened to occur at the time that Russia was interfering in our elections, or was it a convergence of deep personal, political, and financial relationships that worked with Russia as they tried to undermine our democracy? And we're not there yet. It's too early to tell, but we are making progress, Joy, and I will credit Mike Conaway, the chair on the Republican side. We've interviewed more witnesses in the past few weeks than we have in the past 6 months, and that's a credit, I think, to being back on track.
All right. I want to just ask you, before I let you go here, to get your comment on the sort of news of the day. General Kelly coming in as chief of staff to Donald Trump. What do you make of Donald Trump surrounding himself with so many generals?
Well, Joy, we're rooting for General Kelly because the president right now is unfocused. I hope that General Kelly will explain to Mr. Trump the words Yalta, Malta, Casablanca, opportunities where American leadership were on display, working with allies to confront the greatest crisis in the world, which is World War II. We are approaching a very big crisis with North Korea, and we need this president to start stitching together allies and acting like the president.
All right. Congressman Eric Swalwell, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
All right, coming up in our next hour, the media's obsession with Anthony Scaramucci and your moment of Maxine. More AM Joy after the break.